This is the point in the lesson where we start looking at the mechanics of simple chord substitution, which chords will substitute for one another, and why. But for the sake of this quick overview, I'm going to jump ahead now to the section where we're actively using some of those substitutions. Now, just for contrast, and to be clear, I'm going to do the first phrase of that song 3 different ways. The first time, I'll do just like we did earlier, 0 chord substitutions. It'll be the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and back to the 1 chord. We're just doing the first phrase of the song. Now, the second time, I'm going to do a substitute chord to start with. So I'll pick the F major. Okay, so I'll do F major, the 4 chord, back to the 1 chord. So that'll give us some different texture. Now for the third example of that phrase, I'll pick the other chord substitute for the 1 chord. What was the other substitute? Remember the B flat? Okay, so we'll do a B flat, the 4 chord, and back to the 1 chord. So all of a sudden, just by using the simple concepts that we studied in this chapter, you've got 3 different chord patterns that you can play just for the first phrase. Now, if you've been tracking with me for a while, you know that I love to come at music from many different angles. Learn all kinds of techniques, learn to mix and match them up, and you become a great musician. For instance, using the analogy of food that I love to use all the time because I love to eat and I love to play music. It's a good life. Using that analogy, we're cooking up a good musical stew today, and the spice that we're talking about is simple chord substitution. But if you've been to playpianotoday.com before, you know that's not the only spice in the cupboard. I've talked about a lot of different things before, one of them being voicings. Okay, so we're going to talk about simple chord substitutions, and the first example is going to be no substitution at all, right? The 1 chord, the 4 chord, back to the 1 chord. But let's go ahead and voice it. Let's give it a little more interest. Let's do it like this. This is still the 1 chord, right? D, F, and A. To the 4 chord, G, B flat, and D, and back to the 1 chord. Okay, so this is example number 1 we talked about, but I'm going to go ahead and incorporate voicings. It's good to really stretch out a little bit. Here it is. The 1 chord up to the 4 chord, back down to the 1 chord. It's kind of dark and haunting, isn't it? We're not using chord substitution yet, but we are throwing in some voicing. Now, example number 2. Normally, we'd start with the 1 chord, but according to the rules that we just learned in this chapter, chapter 2, we can instead substitute F, G minor, and D. And guess what? We're going to voice it as well. Let's really start stirring the pot. So how about this? A voicing of F. That's a different sound, isn't it? And then go to the 4 chord. All of a sudden, you've got some new chord structure. It still sounds musically pleasing like the 1 chord does. But now we're applying the rule of simple chord substitution, and we're voicing it to get this. 4 chord. Try that. You'd love to play that. I know you would because I love it. It's just such a simple thing to do, but you get such great sound right away. Now we're going to step outside the box a little more, and we're going to do example number 3. And as you know, example 3 is when we go and we apply the rule of simple chord substitution that we studied earlier in this lesson. And we find that, hey, there's another chord available to substitute for the 1 chord. And just like we found out, it's B flat, right? So we're going to do B flat, the 4 chord, back to the 1 chord. This time I'm going to throw out a different voicing for B flat. Watch this. Let me just play it, and then I'll give you an explanation. Listen to that. A whole different sound. What did I do for that substitution? What did I play when I got to that B flat? When you heard me play this voicing, and you may be saying, Dave, you're off your rocker, man. That is not a B flat chord. Well, you got the root, you got the 3rd. Where's the F? Well, I left it out, and that's legal. You can always leave notes out. But that A, well, that's not legal, especially when you're talking about just using 3-note triads. And that's a major 7. It's a B flat major 7. Where'd you get it, Dave? Remember I said we have to always consider the melody? The melody is throwing in that major 7. There it is. So here's the rule. If the melody note of the song plus your simple chord substitution creates a higher chord extension,
go ahead and play that higher chord extension, incorporate it into your voicing. It'll sound great. That's kind of a heavy concept, but it's a beautiful sound. Into the 4 chord. As you can see, in this lesson, a lot of time is devoted to learning to harmonize and add chord substitutions to minor melodies. However, the last half of the lesson focuses on major melodies, and we use as an example the song that we took from Chapter 1, Amazing Grace. Now in Chapter 1, as you're probably aware, we used the chords 1, 4, and 5 to harmonize the melody. But now, using the concept of simple chord substitution taught in this chapter, you now have chords 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, all of the diatonic chords in the scale available to harmonize that same melody. Now in the full version of this lesson, we spent a lot of time going through in depth, exploring the different options, which chords are available as substitutes, and why. But I'm going to skip ahead now, and I'm going to show you the finished video of what that same song sounds like now after we've picked all of our chord substitutions. And you'll see that all of a sudden that same song has brand new life. Here it is. Well, there you have it. Another brick in your foundation in learning to harmonize melodies, or learning how to match chords up with any melody, as I like to say. If you haven't yet had a chance to download this chapter and go through it, make sure you do, because in future chapters, we're going to build on everything in here. In the next coming lessons, we're going to look at 7th chords, so we're going to get away from just those 3-note triads, as great as they are, and we're going to look at some higher extensions all the way through 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths. And then we're going to look at melody notes that didn't necessarily work with simple chord substitutions, but they suddenly sound fantastic once you're using higher chord extensions. So lots of opportunity for growth there. Then we're going to take a look at secondary dominants and secondary 7ths. Learning to find these dominants and 7th chords that are completely outside of the key, but push real nice and add lots of rhythmic interest to the music. That's fantastic. We'll talk about tritone substitutions. This is a mainstay of a lot of jazz and rhythm and blues. We'll look at chromatic movements. This is especially useful between melodic phrases to add rhythm and interest, so that when the singer's taking a break or the saxophone player's taking a break, you can suddenly add some interest on the keyboard, and everyone will say, "Guy's got it going on," or "Lady's got it going on over there." So lots of fun stuff. Anyways, that's coming up. I hope you'll stay tuned for a lot more information. My name is David Sprunger from PlayPianoToday.com. Thanks for tuning in.